afternoon to people joining the webinar, Inside Look on Crowdsource Security, a Founder Ask Me Anything session. My name is Michael Schultz from Bugcrowd, and I'll be the host and the moderator for the webinar today. What we'll cover on the session today is just some quick introductions and background to the panelists. We'll have an open forum, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answer. I'll do my best during the session to be able to feed the questions that you're asking. Please use the panel in GoToMeeting to ask the questions. If you have any issues, please let us know. If you can't hear or you have just a joke to go tell. But we're going to have a really fun session today. Let me announce the two panelists for today's session. First is Casey Ellis, who is the Bugcrowd chairman, founder, and CTO. He's an 18-year information security veteran, a pen tester, security and risk consultant, solutions architect, and overall, really the heartbeat of Bugcrowd. We're also joined by Fredrik Nordberg Almroth, who is a co-founder of Detectify. I like this, coder and stuff and breaker of things. Co-founder and head of engineering at Detectify, Symantec security expert of the future for 2015, and a member of the Google Security Hall of Fame. So I'm really pleased to turn the session over to our great panelists. And again, I will pop in and out to help guide the discussion. Casey, I'd love if you could just talk real quickly about Bugcrowd, and then we'll turn it over to Fredrik to do the same for Detectify.
Very cool, and yeah, good morning, everyone. It's great to be on the webinar this morning with Fredrik and the Detectify folk. Always great to be able to jam on some of the foundry mindsets that exist. In terms of what Bugcrowd does, we were actually the first platform to market in terms of building out, this whole crowdsource security concept. We run vulnerability disclosure programs, bug bounty programs on a public basis, but then we also use the information that we have on the community to deliver the crowdsource model in a private fashion to go after things like pen testing and dynamic app assessment and stuff like that. Really, the core reason why I started Bugcrowd was to level the playing field. We're being attacked by an army of bad guys, and we don't have enough people to go around to start with. So building an army of allies and a platform to connect into the problems just made a lot of sense. And so far, so good. We've been doing it since 2012.
Great. And then Fredrik, if you could talk to us a little bit about Detectify.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Fredrik, and Detectify, we do web-based security automation. So basically, we scan websites and web applications over and over continuously and try to find vulnerabilities. And in terms of crowdsourced security, we have our own platform, like Bugcrowd, where security researchers can submit vulnerabilities to us. We'll automate it, and whenever we find one of these vulnerabilities on one of our customers, you as a hacker will get some kickback. And in that sense, we can scale up our portfolio of vulnerabilities and so forth that we're looking for.
Great. Well, fantastic. Let's get started. So the way this will work is I'll pose a question, and I'll try to alternate between both Casey and Fredrik. But since Casey is right to my right, let's start with you, Casey. How did you become interested in cybersecurity?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up, basically pulling things apart and putting them back together again. My dad was a science teacher, and my mum was, very much into technology and just how things worked as well. So that was always a part of kind of childhood and teenage stuff. Really, at the end of high school, I actually did about 6 weeks of a science degree. I was actually studying to be a radiologist, and then decided, no, I'm only doing this because someone told me that I should. Dropped out and kind of lucked into an IT engineering apprenticeship. And pretty much at that point, I started applying some of the things that I've been reading online and hearing from friends and whatnot around network security. Realized how exciting it was and kind of fun it was. It scratched this, this kind of hacker instinct that I've always, grown up with around, figuring out how things work and getting them to do things that they shouldn't necessarily do based on how they were designed. but it also tickled kind of the criminal thing as well. I often talk about the idea that, I like thinking like a criminal, but I have no desire to be one. So this idea of being able to go out there and kind of do naughty things, but for a good reason and for the purpose of helping people make this stuff safer, that was awesome for me. I think the part where I really fell in love with the broader kind of criminal market and just got fascinated with it. Falling in love with it's a bit too strong, but the idea of just becoming fascinated with criminal creativity at scale was when I started to see some of the virus breakouts and some of the hacks that were happening in the early 2000s, which was pretty much open season for the internet back then. We've gotten a lot better when it comes to network security, but we've kind of replaced the vulnerabilities that existed back then on the network with challenges that we're having with our apps now. So yeah, that's the short version. Great. What about you, Fredrik?
Yeah, so I'm born in 1990, right? So I have a familiar background. About the year 2000, I believe, the I love you letter or the love bug started spreading around. Was this email virus? It was written in like Visual Basic. So I was just a kid, and I got interested in how this all worked. Like you could see it all over the news. I started learning about Visual Basic scripting, some simple batch files and so forth. I couldn't even read English by that point. And this kind of then escalated into web security pretty fast. You all had these kind of MySpace clones here in Scandinavia. So I was on one of these sites and I started fiddling around with HTML and some JavaScript, and I realized like, hey, I can run my own JavaScript. By that point, I didn't really know the security implications, but that's kind of where I got started in coding and so forth. So fast forward a couple of years, got to high school, the SQL injections and so forth started to become a problem. You could see it in the news, and I had progressed a bit more, started coding some .NET, some C++, started learning about PHP and SQL injections, and well, one thing led to another. So when I turned 18, I figured like, hey, I want to do security. So already in high school, I had met the co-founders of what is now Detectify, and we all had like a keen interest in security. So we started automating what we did, like the vulnerabilities we found, to become like a good security consultant. But at the same time, like we wanted to go to university, so it didn't really work out, right? You can't both study and be a security consultant at the same time. It didn't work for us, at least. So we started automating more and more. And well, we founded Detectify then in 2013 based on our earlier security automation. Around the same time, like we found, or I at least found my first bug bounty on Google. It was like in Google AdWords, like a simple cross-site scripting. And well, soon thereafter, 2014, we found this XXE on Google, which allowed us to read the source code of their production servers, which is pretty interesting if you're starting, well, a startup in Stockholm especially, and you manage to hack like such a big company. And that's basically the fundament of Detectify.
That's very cool. It's funny because the summer of worms, I think it was 2003. So I was playing around with Microsoft exploits and following Patch Tuesday and kind of getting into the scene that was doing that at that point in time. And when I think it was MS-03-086 or 026, I can't remember exactly, but when that particular exploit was released, I was pulling it apart and looking at how it worked, and then going out scanning the internet a little bit, understanding where it existed out there. And I made the prediction in the place I was working at the time as a pen tester that this would be a self-propagating worm within 2 weeks, within 14 days. And SASA came out, I think, on day 11 or 12. So that was one of those moments where it's like, holy crap, this is actually pretty fascinating in terms of the intersection between the code and the technology and what the actual bad guys are doing with it in that sense. So that was I think a bit of a hook moment for me as well. It's funny how a lot of people who end up doing a lot of stuff in application security actually start out in networking and kind of go forward from there. I've seen that as a bit of a trend.
Yeah, I agree. It was basically the same for us in the very beginning when we started learning about web-based security. It was a lot of Perl bots, I remember, looking for common vulnerabilities, trying to exploit these SQL injection bugs. And from there, I mean, as I mentioned, I started off also from a network security perspective with worms and viruses and that kind of things.
Yeah.
But moved from there.
Interesting.
Great. Well, fantastic. Well, let's go on to the second question. And Fredrik, it'd be great if you could start with this one. What is the role what role does crowdsourcing play in cybersecurity today? Hopefully that was a good softball question to throw at you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it complements a lot of other security work. Like say if you're like a bigger company, right? You do your annual pen tests, but Crowdsource Security opens up like a whole different mentality around security. I mean, if you do a pen test once a year, vulnerabilities comes out daily, so it doesn't really help that much other from compliance. I think bug bounties and responsible disclosure is kind of fulfilling Linus's law, you know, Linus Torvalds, guy that made Linux.
Yeah.
So it basically goes like, given enough eyeballs or bugs are shallow. And I think it kind of fills that, you know, that lack in the industry.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's funny with Linus's. I started saying a little while back that Linus's law is incomplete. It's, you know, given all bugs and the right incentive. Given many eyes and the right incentive, all bugs are shallow. Because when you think about it, like most of the contribution to open source software is centered around like functionality and features and you know, correction of bugs that might happen there and correction, you know, expansion of function and whatnot. And security issues in open source stuff is one of those things where, you know, like Heartbleed was kicking around for 11 years before someone found it, and there's a lot of examples of that. And how that relates over into crowdsourcing is that, you know, security is pretty easy to just not decide to like wing it and not do anything about it, and maybe nothing bad will happen. You know, not only is I think the burden of evidence kind of mounting that, you know, the internet is a bad neighborhood and people do need to get proactive about it, but also what crowdsourcing does is it incentivizes people to go after these security issues that otherwise wouldn't be necessarily pursued apart from, you know, by anyone apart from like an actual bad actor, an actual bad guy. For me, like starting Bugcrowd really came off the back of running a pen test company. So I worked as a pen tester for about 6 years. Then I shifted across into solutions architecture and more of a front end business development type of role. And then the two things got together and it kind of got stuck in my head that I wanted to do startups and be an entrepreneur. So I did a couple of things. The thing that I was doing directly prior to Bugcrowd was effectively an outsourced pen test firm back in Sydney, Australia. And you know, the thing that was bothering me about it was almost too good as a business for myself and for the people that were also in that space. Like there's just a profound shortage of professionals available to do this type of work, and that drives the charge, the amount that you're able to actually charge for supply up, whilst basically dropping, you know, the quality of what you're supplying. And obviously we tried not to do that pretty hard in the company I was running, but you know, the thing that kept on coming back to me and bothering me is that the model syndrome. Because on top of that, you've got one person that you're paying by the hour, you know, functionally being expected to compete creatively against a crowd of adversaries with lots of different skill sets, lots of different motivations, and more of an incentive for results to find each vulnerability first on a continuous basis. And it's like the math is just wrong. So really the idea, you know, at the genesis of Bugcrowd, and it continues to be true today, is this stuff that Google and Facebook were doing and starting to make popular back then isn't just a Silicon Valley like tech company, highly aggressive, slightly weird thing to do. It's actually a logical way to combat the resourcing and the economics of the bad guys. So that was really the genesis of you know, why I started Bugcrowd. And really what we're seeing now is pretty much an extension of that exact thesis. It's the same way that most people are thinking about it. You see that with people doing bug bounty programs. I think there's also, we see a lot of companies using it for somewhat of a marketing benefit. Like as the average consumer gets more and more nervous about getting hacked, they are starting to pay more attention about how proactive their vendors are with their cybersecurity stuff and things. And yeah, just the general sense of corporate social responsibility as well, like VDP, you know, vulnerability disclosure programs where it's not so much a bug bounty program or a crowdsourced pen test, but it looks very similar because you are engaging a community, right? But it's more of a reactive thing where people have the ability to come to you. That to me is becoming something that's just a standard part of being on the internet and being a good citizen. So,
Right.
There's all these kind of evolutions in terms of like the different variations of crowdsourcing and how it works. Then there's you guys, where, you're basically using crowdsourced, creation of new techniques to extend the capabilities of automation, which is another thing that needs to happen. It's going from just being a bug bounty thing to being something that is truly part of an ecosystem and really is a change of approach in how security's been done.
Yeah, so that's what we realized ourselves. I mean, we started off with this idea of being security consultants, but what we realized is that, we as security researchers, we don't really scale, but we have already been participating in this bug bounty responsible disclosure community. So that's kind of was the seed to why we made Detectify Crowdsource, to like find people like ourselves that have vulnerabilities that we know can be automated and do something a bit different from what you guys are doing, meaning give a kickback on whenever we find one of these vulnerabilities to give back to the community.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, like it's a lot of people out there that are really skilled but cannot really be recruited.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so for example, we have this guy in Detectify Crowdsource. His name is Karim. He hacked Spotify when he was 13 and he lives in Lebanon. Like,
yeah,
neither you or I would like, if he were to work at a normal company, so to say, we wouldn't recruit him. Like, he's too young and he's in the wrong part of the world. So I
it's going to be hard to get that guy on as a consultant. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. My point exactly. So I think this
Yeah,
opens up for a lot of new talent.
Absolutely, and I think that applies to like specific skill sets as well, because this idea of looking for new techniques and being able to build them in is fantastic. It's a brilliant way to take automation forward. From our perspective, like there's kind of gap between where automation leaves off and where the crowd kicks in, because automation's good at what it's been taught to do. There's so much variability between the software and the systems that are built and deployed by humans who have all of this creative capability, but are also fundamentally flawed and can't be expected to behave perfectly, right? So this idea of being able to access folks that really what you're doing is you're connecting the right hacker with the right target. And the right incentive to basically find the things that have been missed, both by automation, regardless of how much it's been improved, but also, by the consultants, of which there are too few.
Great. Excuse me. So the next question, and let me see if I can kind of also pull in something from questions that have been asked so far. To combine the two together. So how are hackers collaborating, but also why they're collaborating today? And maybe Casey, if you can start off with that one and go from there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the big thing that I've noticed as a shift, the hacker community historically has been fairly, there's a very social component to it. There is a component that shares techniques and skills and learnings and stuff like that. But historically, it's been fairly cliquey. Like you've got hacker groups that, there's like smaller communities of people that tend to have a bit of a fence around them, and you're either in or you're not. What I've seen sort of shift quite a bit as the bug bounty community's grown, as new players have come in, as like old players share more of their stuff and take on more of a role of being like the senior kind of maven, wizard folk, wizened teachers, helping all the rookies like learn new stuff. And also, like, frankly, the older generation of people that have been doing disclosure and vulnerability research for the past 20 or 30 years, there's this greater, I think, imperative on community, but also sharing. Like this idea of, okay, we're only going to get better at this if we find ways to work together. And I think that sort of general spirit of collaboration has really its scale is really the only way to put it, because I think it was always there in the hacker community, but it wasn't scalable in its older form, and now it's getting to a place where it actually is.
So yeah, I agree with you that it's getting better, but still I think it's not good enough.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that.
So when I look to know about new techniques, like I find it on either blogs or on Twitter usually, or every now yearly at AppSec or DEF CON or Black Hat and so forth at the conferences. So I think there's a lot to do, and co-founder Matthias, also known as Avlidin, he's also a bug bounty hunter, but a year ago he made a poll on Twitter asking, would you rather share your reports in exchange for seeing everyone else's? And a third said yes to that, which is pretty interesting. Like, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword when it comes to new research, especially in this bug bounty community. I mean, at one hand, you want to cash in on your research. On the other hand, you want to know everyone else's, but also share your research. So, yeah.
Yeah, there is an interesting. I know exactly what you're saying. I think it's funny because the bug bounty model, the whole thing around the first to find or report each unique issue is the one who gets paid, and the more severe or creative or novel it is, the more you get paid. Like, that's a double-edged sword, because what you're doing is you're encouraging people to pursue that type of thing. But in the process of doing that, they're also creating for themselves a competitive advantage. So it's one of those ones where, what I see happen is that, things that are right on the cutting edge don't necessarily get shared as often. Like, you'll see them, show up at conferences and different things like that, or be used to position and build products and so forth. But then it's the stuff that's just back from that that is being shared a lot more. So it's an interesting one, because I think, when you think about it, those really cutting edge techniques almost end up becoming like core intellectual property of the hackers that are figuring them out. Right. And it's really, there's this kind of lead time between when it's unique and individual and when other people start to discover it, and it becomes like more, economically sensible for them to just share it out and move on to the next thing. So it's one of those ones where I sort of wonder how that will evolve. I do stand by what I was saying before around the fact that it's definitely a lot better and more collaborative than it used to be back in the day. But yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying about the fact that it could definitely improve even more. I think the other part with that is some of the stuff that we've been doing. People would have seen Jason Haddock's announcement and Bugcrowd's announcement of the launch of Bugcrowd University. Part of that is teaching, but the other part of it is actually to encourage and foster collaboration. When we're actively encouraging people to contribute to that, and really get it to the point where people are filling in each other's gaps. It's like, if someone's good at a particular style or way of thinking when it comes to hacking, but have a gap in another area, how can you connect them together with someone who actually possesses information or knowledge or skill in that gap? And make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's good.
That sounds awesome, right? Honestly. Like, if I were to participate in some bug bounty program, right, I would most of the time do it myself. But if there are more team collaboration where someone might be good at reconning and another is like, the closer, given enough vulnerabilities, they will figure out a cool exploit chain. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, I agree.
Great. So, Fredrik, have you start off with this one, which is, what hack are you most excited about right now?
I actually have a few. Very lately, this guy, Randy Westigren, he published some research about iframe busters and DOM-based XSS on top sites. And I think that's an iframe buster, right? It's an HTML file you upload on your site if you want to have advertisements and have that as a revenue stream. But these files, they are hard to guess. They are on weird paths on your website, and apparently they don't get updated very often. So this guy, right, he found a bunch of DOM-based cross-site scripting and started talking about it. But I think there are a lot more iframe busters out there that might be vulnerable. And another piece of research that came out recently is James Cadell's Practical Web Cache Poisoning. It's basically how to abuse middleware and caching layers in order to, well, run cross-site scripting or perform other kinds of attacks, both server-side and client-side. And his research was very open-ended when he published it at Black Hat and DEF CON. So I think that can be used to, you know, leverage into other exploitation fields.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. It's amazing. You know, I think on the web side of things, it's interesting seeing new exploitation techniques that cover technologies and approaches in application development that have been around for a long time. I think it's interesting as well seeing, you know, some of the stuff that comes out off the back of like new trends in you know what's going on with how applications are being built. Because that's, you know, what you're talking about there is almost a combination of old and new, right? Iframes have been around forever, but you know, some of the stuff that's going in. Yeah, some of those exploits or some of the thinking that's going into that is relatively unique and modern. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with the S3 buckets, the Amazon service for storing files. It became a big thing, I think, last year, but S3 buckets has been around for as long as Amazon AWS has been around, which is now a good couple of years. I think it takes some time maybe for the security community to catch up with the, you know, both the new stuff out there and also have a look back at the old things that have been lying around on the internet for a long time.
Sure.
I really like that, you know, the mix of the new and the old in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's almost a matter of things being kind of combined together. So it's almost like, you know, 2 or 3 different kind of older techniques being chained together in a certain way to create a new one. That's the stuff that I see that I find most interesting. Like, especially when it comes to, I mean, the two hacks or the 2 kind of techniques really that I'm most excited by at the moment. One is just around this whole area of recon, and how people are, you know, chaining together tools. They're chaining together different things that are available out there to get a better understanding of the attack surface, and then actually using that to give, you know, the company that's running the program a better picture of, you know, what they maybe don't know exists on the internet. We're starting to see sort of products falling out of that now, which is cool too. But, you know, seeing the bug bounty hunters really lead the charge and kind of surface this issue that, you know, most companies, regardless of whether they're old or new, either have stuff out there on the internet that they've forgotten about, or they've got things on the internet that are actively being put there that aren't necessarily within their zone of view, if that makes sense. I think, you know, the other one that I'd call out that I've just been fascinated to watch is just around this whole area of automotive and IoT in general. Like, especially with automotive, the amount of effort and the amount of thinking that's starting to be put into, you know, how to secure the ecosystem, how to hack the ecosystem, like looking at head units. I think people, you know, when they think about automotive hacking, the assumption is, okay, you've got a car with a head unit on it. Let's go after that device in the middle of the car. But there's also the fact that the car actually exists as part of an ecosystem, right? It's phoning home to a web server or services. Oftentimes, like there's, you know, mobile apps attached, there's web portals attached, there's all sorts of different the kind of input vectors and communication channels that exist around a vehicle are actually pretty complicated. And you know, seeing folks think more creatively and more laterally around how they're attacking that in order to get that information to the manufacturers so they can figure out how to secure it. That's something that I'm watching quite a bit because, you know, as more cars end up with internet connected services on them, but also as we move towards, you know, autonomous vehicles at some point in the future, that's going to become really important.
Yeah, so how would you even approach that from an automotive perspective? What if one of the backend services gets compromised? Like, what would the implications be, really? I mean, a car is a car, and if you can push out over-the-air updates, that's the big deal, right?
Some can. And I think that, you know, the thing that's interesting there, like, we've been working with Tesla for a really long time. I think one of the things that happened with them that actually signaled very strongly to the rest of the automotive industry was when I think it was Tencent came out with a couple of chains that they presented at a conference a little while back. Tesla actually had that stuff patched and deployed 100% into production within, I think, 11 days of the initial disclosure between the research team and them as an organization, which, yeah, that doesn't happen by accident. Like being able to resolve, regression test, and then deploy software, fixes on a system that's so complicated and so safety critical, that's not the kind of thing that happens by accident. So that's one of those things where, the considerations around like OTA and security architecture become really important. They're open sourcing all that stuff too. So there's a lot of eyes being put on that. I mean, I think the other piece around this is just seeing how the hacker community is getting really interested in it. We're running a bug bash coming up shortly where a bunch of hackers are going to be basically pulling apart or going after the software in a set of vehicles. There's OWASP going on at the moment where that's been announced. And yeah, it's like there's a lot of interest in that. There's people that can do it because they're car hackers and they have been for a long time, but there's this other group that have been getting into IoT or AppSec or whatever else that are realizing that this is pretty much what a car is, what a car's made of as it relates to us, and starting to get into it.
That's really cool.
Right. So Casey, have you take the next question. So it kind of fits, I think, within the themes of IoT that you just talked about. But
yeah.
It's really, how do you motivate the bug bounty community? What are you finding sort of maybe has even changed, which is kind of one of the questions that has, kind of came into the panel. Just kind of getting that dynamic would be really interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like we do a lot of surveying as a company, like getting motivations from people. I spend a lot of my time just frankly chatting with hackers as well, and this is one of the questions that I try to get into and understand. The short answer is there's a really, really broad range of stuff. There's cash as the common element because everyone's got to eat. That's not necessarily even the first thing for some folk. Some folk are doing it because they enjoy the challenge. They want to, there's that kind of hacker kind of, almost obsessive drive to solve the puzzle. And a lot of people actually get into this because that's the thing that drives them. They just really enjoy it and they love doing it. I think, the intellectual kind of ascent, like the learning, actually understanding new things and pulling them apart, putting them back together, again, coming back to this kind of core hacker, what is the nature of a hacker? It's someone who wants to do that type of thing. The other part is just straight up altruism. I think there are folks, there's varying degrees of this in the community, but they just recognize that they have the opportunity to make the internet a safer place and a more secure place. And, they want to help out in doing that. So, really what drives them, how we engage that and how we kind of connect value from point A to point B is to, create the crowdsource model and the games that we've mentioned, like the bug bounty concept of, this combination of competition between the different hackers, but also a collaborative component as well, where they're sharing and making each other smarter. That's worked phenomenally well since even before we were doing it. Like the first bug bounty program was Netscape in 1995, and we found the very original security bug bounty program that we could identify was Charles Hobbs cracking a lock at the first American World Fair in like 1851. He got paid the equivalent of $50,000 for that one. So it's clearly an idea that's we didn't invent in terms of its initial iteration, but as we go forward, it's like, what are the other kind of game models? What are the other kind of incentives? How do we get, more cash out to the hackers to have this be something that can turn into a job for more people than it can support right now? Especially as more companies kind of look at it as the future of how they're going to do a bunch of their security focused work.
And Fredrik?
Yeah. So I believe it's honestly pretty basic. It's fame, it's money, and basically having the hacker mindset, the puzzle solving aspect of it all. I don't know how to elaborate more on that. If you get into this bug bounty community, you start finding some bugs. and you have the right mindset, you will be hooked. Like, that's what I've seen, at least.
Yeah.
At that point, I mean, it's more money, more fame, and new research coming out, and you get even more hooked. It's kind of addictive, you know?
It's a funny one too, because I think fame, like I completely agree, fame as a core motivator or a very common and distinctive motivator in the community. It's an interesting one with that one, because like fame to me, it serves two purposes, and it like the bias between the two can depend on the hacker. It's either fame, for like frankly ego's sake. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's like, I just want to develop a reputation in this industry and this community because I just want to have one, right? Which is fine. Some people, that's their driver. But the other piece that we see quite a lot is folk using bug bounty as an on-ramp to basically build out a reputation, which, is fame when you think about it, for the purpose of actually getting into the cybersecurity industry as a career. So, folk kind of building out their reputation, getting introductions to companies off the back of that, and all of a sudden they've got a full-time cybersecurity job alongside their bug hunting. The thing I love about that is that's mostly applying to people that have probably been fascinated in security for their entire life, but have never necessarily, gotten a job in the space. We actually see that quite a bit, like gamers, like IT engineers, developers, folk that, they've never had the word security on their resume in their work history, but they've been sitting up until 3 a.m., on Twitter and IRC, like jamming with hackers and understanding how to break into stuff. So seeing this, actually using this as an on-ramp into a career in security, ultimately that's a money thing, but it's also career and fame as well attached to that.
Isn't it kind of strange? I mean, it's too few people in the security industry, right? So if people have the skill set, like, why don't they get employed easier?
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing that we see happen, because I got to say, like, this isn't actually part of our business model, but if we see the opportunity to connect a hacker with a company for the purpose of them getting a job there, we'll just do it out of goodwill for both sides. And what we'll see happen is they'll get employed, they'll kind of drop off and not be as active for a couple of months while they're spinning up and playing with all their new toys, and then they'll come back and do more. So it's a really interesting, watching really how this whole thing is actually kind of influencing and starting to change the nature of the workforce itself.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, Fredrik, I'm going to have you start off with question 6, but let me see if I can pull in a couple of different questions together. So this one was really about meeting the needs of both cybersecurity teams and ethical hackers in order to find vulnerabilities. I think along with that, it's about the notion of increasing knowledge and awareness within some of these security teams and organizations. So you can kind of talk about that. That would be great.
Yeah, Fredrik, you want to take a
Sorry? Yeah, so at Detectify, right, we automate vulnerabilities and we look at a broad range of assets. And it's not just about generating a pen test report, because in my opinion, that's kind of the old world of how things work. Security is dynamic. You might push updates to your website like 50 times a day. The vulnerabilities come and go. So the educational part of what the vulnerability really means, it changes. So we focus quite a lot on how to read reports, like, what does this vulnerability really imply? Just having a warning on a report, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean you're vulnerable, but if you can combine it with some cross-site scripting, for example, then things can go very bad. So that's kind of our approach at it. And besides, we know what our customers are running, like they have a WordPress site over here and they run this on AWS and so forth. So it allows us to tweak what data we show where, if that makes sense. So we kind of try to do this scalable and automatic.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as we were kind of touching on earlier, what we're trying to do is to basically fill the gap that's left inherently by automation. Like, you guys are reducing that gap, and then what we're doing is filling what's left over between Detectify and the other scanning solutions that aren't necessarily as advanced as you guys out there in the market, right? I think the piece there is this idea of, like, what are the needs, what are the gaps in the security teams. Like the number that always stands out to me is, I think it's 350,000 unfilled jobs in cybersecurity just in the US today, right? So we've got this enormous shortage of talent and people to be basically engaged to do these types of things, and then to move on into the more kind of close to the root cause issues like defense and developer training and so on. And, okay, cool. How do we connect the right skills and really a diverse range of skills, which to your point earlier is hard and is actually ideally suited to the crowdsourced model, because, we're sitting on 100,000 people that have signed up to the platform at this point. And there's a pretty broad variety of different priorities, skill sets, backgrounds, language preferences and so on that are sitting out there. So basically connecting the right talent to the right target and then having them think about it as an attacker would. What are the gaps that might exist? How did people actually design this system? What can I infer from that to figure out how best to attack it and so on? And on top of that, the whole idea of like, how do we start to federate and share some of that knowledge between the crowd to make them smarter? The whole idea of Bugcrowd University, like the forums that we're running, and just the general initiatives to basically encourage hackers to collaborate with each other and make each other smarter. That's the other part of it, because all of these interactions that are going on, there's an incredible awareness that the crowd's developing around what's actually most important, and I think that helps both sides ultimately.
Great. So I want to thank both Katie and Fredrik for kind of guiding us through. I want to use the remaining time that we have to just cover off a few questions that have kind of come in that we haven't had a chance to address. And I'll leave it both Fredrik and Katie. You guys can decide how you want to handle and respond and who's the best one. So I thought there was a great question around kind of the notion of what's next in the future kind of cybersecurity in general, and maybe both to comment on that.
Yeah, Fredrik, you want to take the first cut of that one?
So I think it will go more towards cloud, as we've seen for the past couple of years. Even more containers, Dockerized things, and even more web apps in general. You can see like all over the place, it becomes more and more web technologies, less and less, the older protocols, more web sockets and so forth, which means more web security to be done. I mean, the development focus on new software, it doesn't seem to slow down necessarily. I think it will be a lot more, web vulnerabilities to be found. I mean, just look at Slack, right? You have this Electron application that runs on your desktop. That in its own right is like basically Google Chrome, but having a cross-site scripting in the Slack app would potentially lead to remote code execution. So, old vulnerabilities taking new forms, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure. I completely agree with that. I see, really the future, where the industry is heading is really driven by, a combination of what the bad guys are up to, and what, IT is up to, what the defenders are up to, because ultimately the only reason we're even having this conversation in the first place is that both of those things exist, right? And I completely agree with you on the IT side, like just this general trend to put the internet on anything that we can think of, and really, the impact that has on the overall attack surface that we need to secure. To me, like the where the industry is heading there is thinking about how, like, for the average person who's running a security program, to think of it more in terms of how do we have the ability to innovate at least the same level, but ideally ahead of the adversary. Like, it's not just about how do we find out bugs or how do we put a firewall in or thinking about it as a technology problem. It's actually a human one. And the whole reason we're doing it is because the bad guys are creative. So really like that shift in thinking around how do we, innovate to the same degree or higher than what the folks that are coming against us would be capable of. And then how do we make changes based on that? I think the other piece from my perspective is that intelligence is really most effective when it goes outside of the security team and down into the rest of the organization. So I think this concept of moving from security being something that's mostly focused on remediation to something that's moving towards a focus on prevention, actually at the root cause. And to me, like, that's the true value of when you're running a bug bounty program. The ones that are most successful for us is when the customer treats it more like a conversation between people that think like builders and people that think like breakers, as opposed to here's a bug, there's a bug, everywhere's a bug. So yeah, that's sort of where I see it going and where I hope it's going. We're seeing, you know, trends and patterns and moves in that direction, and obviously the kind of the blow up in the conversation around crowdsourcing is evidence of that. You know, frankly, I think I see it as almost being inevitable, because we're kind of screwed if we don't. Like, if we don't start changing the way that we think about these types of things, and if we don't start resourcing ourselves to be more creative than the bad guys are, you know, the kind of push towards putting everything on the internet is going to land us in a very bad spot as an internet. So yeah.
Right. Good. So we'll do one last question, then we'll wrap up. And maybe both of you can comment real briefly on this one, which is, there's been a couple of questions about how to improve and how to get better and where to go for information. So maybe both of you, I don't know, Casey, you want to just start with what can folks who are interested do?
Yeah, for sure. So folks that are interested, you know, if you're coming in new to the field, then you know, you guys will hate this recommendation, but I do recommend jumping on Twitter and starting to like join the conversations that are happening between the different bug bounty hunters, the broader security research community, and so on. I will warn you, we are a bunch of people break things for a living, so there's no shortage of drama that'll pop up from time to time, but you will get to learn the techniques and the styles of thinking and all of those different things that are going on. There's Slack channels that exist out there that have been created. Bug Bounty World is a really good one for newer folks. There's just a ton of people in there. And again, it's kind of noisy, but if you can build into the community and actually develop relationships and friendships, where there is that ability to, you know, ping back off each other and have kind of cumulative collaborative learning, I do think that's the most effective way to up-level your skills quickly. Outside of that, you know, I mentioned before the Bugcrowd University stuff that Haddix's team has been running and working on and building out. They're actually in the Philippines right now presenting it at RootCon. So there's a lot of basically open sourced methodology and training models that exist there. And we're putting a ton of work into increasing the content, you know, just out of Bugcrowd, but also getting it in from the outside world, including that. And we have a forum as well where a lot of people come and ask questions, meet people, and just generally connect. So yeah, those are my suggestions.
Great. Yeah, so if you're not a bug bounty hunter, but more of a blue team or security operations kind of guy, I think a good place to start, if you haven't already, is to set up a responsible disclosure page, just to get some vulnerabilities in. You know, then you get to see what people are reporting and what flaws you might have, and also get you know, get a feeling for how the community works.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can only agree with Casey. I mean, that's some excellent tips.
Beautiful.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap this up. There was a couple of questions about getting access to recording for people who join late. We will send a link to the recording sometime over the next couple of days to everyone who's registered. So if you have any questions, there's a way to contact both Bugcrowd and Detectify. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. Thank you to both Fredrik and Casey, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.